Welcome to the Football Outsiders live stream for, oh my God, I can't believe we're already in December. December 1st, 2021. Hi, I'm Aaron Schatz. I'm editor-in-chief of Football Outsiders. I'd like to welcome you watching on Twitch and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and in the little corner of our site widget in the corner of Football Outsiders. Welcome everybody who's watching today's live stream. I am joined today by Cale Clinton, Any Given Sunday and Major Domo of Week in Quotes, and our resident Bengals fan, Rob Weintraub, and our man in the center of college football down in Atlanta. We were just discussing, these two gentlemen are both Syracuse men, and we were just discussing the demise of Syracuse football before we came on the air. Today's show is the Ask Us Anything show. I've got a few questions from before we got on the air. We'll get to, but you can ask us any questions. That's why we want you watching live when we're on at 1 o'clock Eastern every afternoon, every weekday afternoon. We're not here on Saturdays and Sundays, but we want you watching live on Twitch or on YouTube so you can ask us questions. And today we can take all your questions. But I wanted to start by talking to Rob how he feels about these two big Bengals wins and about my writing this week about how DVOA doesn't like the Bengals compared to other methods. Like even EPA, I know EPA metrics have the Bengals a lot higher than both DVOA and ESPN's Football Power Index also has them only 18th. So what's your feeling about that, man?
Well, I mean, obviously, my feeling is I'll take the W's and forget about the advanced stat for now.
True.
Especially beating the Steelers twice in one season is not quite unprecedented, but it's for a guy like me.
Not just beating them, but punishing them this week.
Yeah, it was a great Hanukkah present. Let's put it that way. And yeah, it's like drinking deep from the oasis after crawling through the desert for many, many years. So, big picture, I could care less. I'm not surprised. Listen, the Bengals racked up a few big victories earlier in the year, and squeaked them out over the likes of the Jaguars, the Vikings. They lost to the Bears and the Jets. I mean, these were either or games, and they really they played a tight game against the Packers, but they also played the Browns, who are a good DVOA team who pummeled them. So, going into the bye week, especially, not a surprise that the DVOA wasn't as high on them as their record indicated. And the last 2 weeks, they've crushed the Raiders and the Steelers, but those are two teams sort of in the same boat as the Bengals, really, kind of, mid-pack teams. Not surprising they didn't take a huge leap, even though by efficiency standards, they certainly played better in those games.
Oh, yeah, they definitely leapt up over the last 2 weeks compared to where they were before.
Yeah, 7 or 8 spots, which is obviously great, but they're still not a team that you look at as a top 10 DVOA team, which, that can certainly change. The one thing that we've seen this season, especially in the AFC, is that things can change in an eye blink. And, they went from the number 1 overall seed to, I think, number 10 in the span of 2 weeks right before the bye. And, the bye week really helped them. They got back to work on a couple of things. They really solidified what they do best, which is run wide zone power game beat with Joe Mixon. And they replaced their right guard, who was Jackson Carman, a rookie, sort of the guy that was the number 2 pick in the Jamar Chase, exacta there, and justified picking a wide receiver when the whole world was like, draft Penei Sewell, draft an offensive lineman at number 5. And they didn't. They drafted Chase, and they said, we got a good lineman in the second round. But now they benched him for a guy who was a 6th-round pick last year, Hakeem Adeniji, who was injured at the beginning of the year, and most fans, including myself, assumed he was out for the year. But he's back, and he's actually fitting what they want to do technically and agility-wise at right guard much better than Carman. And I think you've seen him play, and that's really reflected in the last couple of weeks. Trey Hopkins, the center, he was back from a torn ACL and started the year, but he wasn't back really until the bye week, and he's had his best 2 games the last couple of weeks. Just the rest and the health, and got better at agility. You really saw it against Pittsburgh. Devin Bush, who also was coming off a torn ACL and is decidedly not as back. He was beating Bush to the spot over and over again, to the point where Bush was freelancing and had to get benched. And, they're just doing a lot more things technically correct on that offensive line, which is cohering much better as a unit than it had been. and it's showing up. Joe Mixon is still Joe Mixon. He's a horse guy you don't really think of as a power back, but is just as big as Jonathan Taylor, and despite the flamboyance and the slipperiness in his game, is a guy you don't want to tackle in the second half. That's showing up, especially against the Raiders. So they're doing what they want to do on the ground finally, and it took them, the half the season to get that going. And they're also teams are trying to shade their secondary to take away Jamar Chase, and the Bengals are like, no problem, we'll throw to T. Higgins.
Got two other guys. Hi,
we'll more. They got Uzama. They'll beat you in the air in a lot of different ways, and Joe Burrow is certainly equipped to do that. He's another guy who's certain metrics love him. DVOA, DYAR does not necessarily. I think a large part in some of that's the turnovers that he's had this year. The last 2 games, he's cut down on those. They haven't been crucial, certainly. And, he obviously knows what to do and where to go with the ball for most of the time. When you have a plethora of weapons that they have, he can just play point guard. He doesn't have to beat you deep like he was doing.
Right, which is his strength. I mean, diagnosing the defense before the snap and figuring out where he wants to go with it is his strength. It's not his arm. It's his
he's not a drive the ball into tight windows guy. He'll do it on occasion, but he's definitely let's get the right play in out of these 2 or 3 that are presented to me at the line and go to the wide open guy or the mismatch. And you saw that against Pittsburgh, especially. It was blatant. So, whether that is sustainable over the, as they face tougher and tougher defenses down the stretch is arguable. I think the Chargers, though, the next opponent, certainly not a good run defense. I think they're dead last, right, in DVOA, and their pass defense has kind of come down a little bit from a hot start as well. So there should be opportunities to score some points. Justin Herbert obviously presents difficulties, but they've been pretty hit or miss, like everybody else pretty much in the AFC right now, except New England. We'll get to them later. So overall, DVOA be damned. You got to like their chances certainly to be in the mix. And then it's just going to be a question of whether they stay healthy, knock on wood loudly, because that's been a key to their success so far this year, obviously, certainly in the AFC North, where the other 3 teams are pretty beat up. And the Bengals are winning by attrition as much as anything else right now. And, they're the fewest penalties in the league. They're doing a lot of things right. So the question
is that is part of it, I think, is the fewest penalties in the league. Because of the fact that most penalties don't count in DVOA,
right?
I think that is one of the reasons for the difference between where the Bengals are and DVOA. For example, Hitchhiker's Pie points out that opponent-adjusted EPA per play that Tucker Boynton does also has the Bengals 5th, which is way higher than DVOA. And it is surprising to see that big of a gap between one opponent-adjusted advanced metric and another opponent-adjusted advanced metric. And I think a big reason is penalties. I think that I'm not crediting, it's not that I'm not crediting them for lack of penalties. I'm not penalizing other teams that have a lot of penalties, right? Other than only a couple penalties count in DVOA, false starts, defensive pass interference. But for the most part, I'm not counting penalties because penalties are usually not very predictive. They're usually very kind of random. So that could be one of the big differences between DVOA and other metrics when it comes to the Bengals. And you're absolutely right. The Chargers would seem to be a good opponent for them because their run defense is so bad. They're also really weak against tight ends, so it could be a big Ozuma game. But I just feel like I don't really trust the Bengals defense as much as the standard stats do, and I feel like the Chargers can put up a lot of points. The Chargers are second right now in offense, so I feel like the only reason why I wouldn't call this a shootout is because Cincinnati will run the ball so much that it'll take lots of time off the clock, and it'll keep it from being a true shootout.
That's the game plan, obviously. Keep the ball away from Herbert and Eckler and the offense as much as you possibly can. Defensively, I would say that really they fell off badly against the Jets and Browns, the Bengals this is. But, a lot of that was just missed tackling, bad tackling. And they've improved that since the bye week. It wasn't schematic. It wasn't like they were getting overmatched per se. It was just technique, just guys rallying to the spot and blowing the play when the time came. So Pittsburgh and Las Vegas ball carriers and receivers were not getting a lot of extra yards against them the way the Jets and Browns were. Obviously you got to keep that up, and that's not week to week sustainable necessarily, but I feel like their defense has played well essentially in all games but two, well enough to win all but two of the games. So, the preponderance of the evidence would suggest that if they're not a shutdown takeover defense, but they're certainly a defense that'll keep you in games. And as you say, as long as they're not on the field too much due to turnovers or due to, the running game being shut down by the Chargers or anybody else, they should be in a good
running game. Will not be shut down by the Chargers.
It's highly unlikely. Yeah, I don't want to.
It's highly unlikely. It is. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Cale. I will fully admit I have not seen a lot of the Bengals. I'm looking forward actually to watching this week. The Bengals Chargers it's not, it's a 1:00 game, so it's not a national game, but it is the game that's going to be showed in like over half the country, I think, in the 1:00 time slot. Here in Boston, that's the game we're getting. We're getting Cincinnati.
Yeah, they were going to flex it to the Sunday night. There was thought that they were going to flex it, but they
and they ended up flexing Broncos Chiefs instead. I guess figuring people wanted to watch Mahomes. I guess that's a sign of the fan base of the Los Angeles Chargers, because normally you would think that they would want to flex the number 2 media market instead of Kansas City, Denver.
Yeah, you would think. But there are no Chargers fans, I guess. There's even fewer Chargers fans than there are Bengals fans, so that should tell you something. But yeah, I think down the road you'll see the Bengals get into some better positions to be viewed, as you say. So, but yeah, go ahead and let somebody else talk about let somebody else brag on the Bengals.
Yeah, for any given Sunday stuff, I had the chance to watch one game for the Bengals at least, and it was their massive win over the Ravens. And my conclusion that at least came out of that game was, the offense is really explosive, but a lot of those touchdowns, I think both of CJ Uzomah's touchdowns came on broken coverage on Baltimore's behalf. And I think one of the – I don't know. I'm still pretty green when it comes to DVOA. I need to keep, familiarizing myself with how it's calculated and things like that. But one of the things that really stands out to me with Cincinnati is the fact that, one, we have them playing the second easiest schedule in all of football in terms of total DVOA, and they're bottom 5 in variance. Like they've been extremely volatile throughout the entire year. So it's interesting.
What happens when you lose to the Jets and get spanked by the Browns, and then have these big wins over the Steelers and the Ravens?
Yeah, and it seems like they've come to form in a little bit. Like, Mixon's had 2 straight 100-yard games. Jamar Chase is doing Jamar Chase things. He's been the connection between Burrow and Chase has not dissipated since they both left LSU. It's still been very special, but like the Bengals just have this weird scheduling thing, like where if McPherson doesn't just completely forget how to kick in overtime, they might even have a win over Green Bay. Like they've got some really strong wins. The Baltimore one still especially stands out to me. Kicking off the season against Minnesota too. I understand that's really early, but we all understood Minnesota's got a pretty good offense. It was surprising they were able to pull that out, at least in my opinion. But like, it's just those losses still stick out to me. Like, I still don't like the Bengals and the Titans both having losses against the Jets. Still just
the Titans at least you can sort of understand based on personnel, the lack of Jones and Brown in that game. But
I've been really impressed with this offense. I've also been impressed with just how this defense. I don't know how long it's going to hold up long term, but it's looked better than I would have expected coming into the year at the very least.
Yeah, I'll say a couple things. First, let me defend future 10-time All-Pro Evan McPherson, my personal kicking hero. That game, that kick against the Packers was right down the middle. I mean, he was celebrating to win it, and then this bizarre thing that they have at Paul Brown Stadium. Every now and again, they get a high gust of wind that comes out of nowhere up above the stadium, and it pushed it just enough. Anyway,
hard left.
It took a real hard turn there if you remember watching that game. And I think you have to – it's sort of like by DVOA and just in general terms, you look at the Bengals kind of big picture from the entire season. Yeah, they're erratic. They did some things that you leave you scratching your head. They had these great performances out of nowhere and crappy performances when you're ready to trust them again. But I mean, I think again, this is what happens when you have a young team that's just really coming together. They have, sort of this quote unquote culture that's going on in their locker room that it took a couple years to build. And after those 2 losses, the Jets and the Browns, there was a lot of people coming forward to say, hey, you guys panicked. Are you worried about anything? And they were like, we got this. It stems from Burrow, I think, in a large part, but also just the players that they added. They added specifically, they tried to get guys who were from winning teams and teams that, they understand the big picture of it all. And a little bit of, up and down arrow on the DVOA graph was not going to send them into a tizzy. And you saw that with the last two games. They were, pretty relaxed about it. They knew that they were better than the Raiders, better than the Steelers, and just they were going to pound them until the dam broke, as they say. And I think that's a good big picture kind of thing to look at. It's not advanced analytics in any sense, but from a Bengals perspective, from a guy who's watched this team come apart at the instantly for seemingly no reason at all over the years. It's a positive development, and the mindset that they've had, and the kind of mental toughness that they've shown is very un-Bengal like. So again, I can certainly nitpick, and I do it all the time with this team, but a couple of bad performances right before the bye week, to my mind, has been pretty much buried by the last 2 weeks, and I think the arrow is definitely pointed up.
The Bengals are essentially where I expected the Patriots to be before the season.
Yeah, a lot of similarities.
It's our young team, kind of on the rise, inconsistent, but in good position to get a playoff spot. And my feeling going into the season was, like, if the Patriots get a playoff spot, that's it. That's a success, right? Because that shows team on the rise, get a playoff spot. And I think that's basically where the Bengals are. I don't think there's any sense that they're like a Super Bowl contender. But I know that in our playoff odds, if the top 7 teams in playoff odds all got playoff spots, the Bengals are in.
Yeah.
So, it feels like a good, successful season of a team that's building towards something. And they're probably going to end up in the playoffs, and it feels good.
Not to dive too deep into Bengal history, but there's a lot of talk before the year and as it's gone on is, what team could this be? Is this the 2004 Bengals or the 2005 Bengals? 05 Bengals were a real powerhouse that unfortunately got short-circuited in the playoff game by the extremely dirty hit on Carson. I can't even say his name, but that was a powerful team that was headed places. 2004, you could see it was a nascent team that was building something, but they weren't quite there yet. The difference in 2004 was that you had the Steelers and the Patriots that year were elite teams that were obviously Super Bowl contenders and pretty much pummeled everyone they played. The Bengals were in that next tier down and were fighting to get into tier 2. This year, there is no tier 1 really in the AFC particularly. So even a 2004 level team that the Bengals probably are at heart can make an extra step forward just because of the competition that they'll be facing, and the fact that come playoff time, maybe you can argue the Patriots, but every other team that they're going to wind up playing is not a team that they'll necessarily be fearing and might be favored against just about everybody, depending on whether it's home or away. So there's a qualitative difference in the level of the teams maybe, but given the overall big picture of the AFC, I think that gives them an edge that they wouldn't have ordinarily.
I was going to say that gets us to the next question that I want to hit, because based on DVOA, there is a tier system in the AFC, and that first tier is the Patriots and Bills.
Yeah.
With knowing that those teams are both inconsistent, the Bills, of course, are the most inconsistent team we've ever measured. The Patriots come out as inconsistent, but the way that the games have been, the order of the games, it's not really inconsistency, it's improvement.
Yeah.
Right? They're high in variance because they had these bad games at the start of the season and these really good games near the end of the season. A little cheeky asks, we'll go back, what is holding the Bengals back from being a Super Bowl contender? I mean, I just think it's just a question of just they're not there yet.
Yeah, they haven't gone through it,
but also just there's more improvement to be done. I'm not as much of a believer in you have to have listen, as a fan of the 2001 Patriots, I don't believe you have to have done it before in order to do it again, but they just need to get better. That's all. There's just Burrow's gotten better, but there's more improvement yet to come. The defense has gotten better, but there's more improvement yet to come. They just feel like a wild card team that could improve more. I mean, first of all, they could go on a run over these last 6 games and improve more and be like the 2001 Patriots. But I'm also thinking it's more like the 2004 Bengals, where it's like next year is the year.
Yeah.
Like next year is the year that everybody takes that extra step forward.
Yeah, and
that's what I think is holding them back from being a Super Bowl contender this year.
Yeah, and the only thing that could be in their favor is, again, it's like with the 01 Patriots, it's like who knows what happens next year? Let's seize the opportunity now if it presents itself, which it very well might. That's what I'm saying. It's not even a question about the Bengals. What's holding them back? Of course, they can improve in several areas, but so can the rest of the AFC teams. That's really kind of the point. It's like when they play these teams, hopefully in the playoffs, they're going to be facing teams that are just as flawed, if not more so. So it's a question of who seizes that opportunity. And that, when it comes to that, who really ever knows? To me, the only difference between any of those teams and, the one separator still to me is Bill Belichick. I mean, for all the Sturm and Drang around him at all times, he's an elite coach. He's a difference maker on the sideline that nobody else really has. And
although, listen, I mean, I'm a big McDermott guy. I'm a big Sean McDermott
coaches
guy.
out there, no doubt.
So he doesn't have the historical record that Belichick does. And I know the way that the Bills have been inconsistent this year, you want to smack somebody in the head. But like I am a big McDermott guy. I think he's a really good coach.
And Harbaugh too. I mean, I like a lot of these coaches. Sure. It's just when Belichick says something, they're going to believe him because of the hardware he puts on his hand. There's never any questioning from what he says, and that goes a long way.
And you do wonder about the Patriots' mystique and the weird things that opponents seem to do against the Patriots when they come to Foxborough that just make you scratch your head.
Yeah.
So Ishan Sawai asked us before the show on Twitter, what is the main thing driving the difference in how Football Outsiders views the Patriots' playoff odds versus other models like ESPN and 538, which have the Patriots much lower? So we have the Patriots' chance to win the Super Bowl right now at like 25%.
Yeah.
Which seems absurdly high. Like, I will fully admit that is too high for me. That if you asked me subjectively, I do think the Patriots right now have the best chance of any team in the AFC to win the Super Bowl. It should not be that high.
Right.
And why do we have it so much different than 538 or the market, which has it more like 10%? ESPN's model has it more like 10%. I honestly don't know the answer to this question. I can guess based on my knowledge of how our ratings work versus how their ratings work. One difference, I think, is that I'm using Dave, which includes weighted DVOA, which means I'm lowering the strength of those earlier games where the Patriots were not as good. But I'm not lowering them to zero.
Right.
And I think that 538's ELO system also puts more weight on recent games. So that is a reason why our odds are different from ESPN's, but not necessarily why they're different from 538's. In fact, if I remember correctly from when I looked at 538, 538 has the Patriots number one in the AFC. They just have them lower than 3 NFC teams.
Right.
Whereas we have the Patriots now number one in weighted DVOA. So they're ahead of the Packers, the Cardinals, the Buccaneers. We just have the Patriots really, really high. And the other thing is we don't have any other AFC teams really high, like the top 8 or something teams in. If you look at Dave, right, which at this point is mostly weighted DVOA. It's very little preseason. And you look at the numbers that are adjusted for quarterbacks. So boosting the Cardinals, boosting the Packers because of the games they've had with the backup quarterbacks. Okay. Only 2 of the top 7 teams are AFC teams, New England and Buffalo. So there's this big gap between New England and Buffalo and the rest of the AFC. And since it thinks that New England sweeping Buffalo is more likely than Buffalo sweeping New England, and the most likely thing is that they split the 2 games, and the Buffalo still has to play Tampa, like it just gives the Patriots really, really good odds to win the number 1 seed. And it feels too high to me, but, otherwise I don't know why our ratings are so much different than ESPN. Like, one argument I would make is that I'm right now in the playoff odds simulation equation, I don't consider offense and defense separately. and I probably should because we know that offense is more predictive than defense. Yeah. I think that ESPN's rating system does that, except they have the Bills number 1. And the Bills are number 1 because of defense, because of offense. Because Allen hasn't been that much better than Mac Jones this year. So, like, it's kind of a mystery to me why we have them so much higher than everybody else. And I'll add that I'm not happy about this. I know I'm a Patriots fan, and I'm honest about being a Patriots fan. And if we're going to have an outlier team that is better than any other side, like I would much rather have that outlier be some other team than have it be the Patriots and look like I'm some kind of homer. I will say Christopher Ordona's comment about the Patriots should do well in the playoffs because they're an extremely good team on the road this season. I will say I am not a believer that home road splits really mean anything. Over time, you find that all teams basically have the same home field advantage. Like there's a little bit of an advantage for historically for home teams when the road team has had to travel a really long distance, like to Seattle. But for the most part, like over time, any differences between one team and another in home field advantage tend to wash out. So I will say I'm not a great believer that just because the Patriots have been so good on the road this year, that translates to being really good on the road in the playoffs.
Yeah, home road is shown to mean pretty much nothing over the last 2-3 years.
That's the other thing, right? Which is honestly the main reason to get number 1 seed is so you don't have to play in the first round
again. Yeah,
you automatically go through. Like that's the reason. Home field advantage doesn't feel like it means anything right now.
No, zero. Yeah, I mean, I would just add that you do live in Massachusetts. Bill Belichick does have access to, the lab where you put these together. His finger is on the scale of the algorithm.
If Belichick truly had access to my numbers, he would make sure the Patriots always came out worse than they really are.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
All he wants to do is tell his players that they're not as good as they think they are, and therefore they have to work harder.
It's true. Maybe it's Dan Sonesy.
It's a 2-4 mentality. I will say New England's got those 2 games against Buffalo, and I do think, especially with the loss of Trey White, that probably shakes things in New England's favor a bit. But they're getting about as close as Buffalo's getting a mini bye because they're coming off Thanksgiving and getting that Thursday to Monday sort of break. New England has their bye. I thought they had – no, never mind. I thought they had their bye outright before that second Buffalo game, but they have their bye following.
No, the bye is before the Indianapolis game.
Yeah, I got that. But that's still – I'm really interested to see those 2 games. And I think New England I need to check the odds again for their top seed chances, but – considering that Baltimore is the only team ahead of them right now in seeding, I know Tennessee's banged up and they've got a very easy road ahead of them. But Baltimore's got a pretty tough schedule ahead. I don't want to fully pivot to them, but they just played Cleveland tough. They have to play Cleveland again. They play the Packers. They play Bengals, Rams. They've got tough sledding. I don't think they'll be able to hold on to that 1 seed. And I think it's whoever's going to end up with it.
There's no question we have the Chiefs lower than the market.
Yeah.
Right. The market believes in Chiefs offense more than we do because of the fact that the Chiefs offense did have a couple of bad games. So I understand that part of it. Since we don't have the Chiefs as high as the market, we're going to have other teams higher. Oh, and hey, here he is halfway through the show joining us, Mike Tanier.
Is that Bill Belichick coming in? No.
Bruce Arians. This is what it really is. If you've been watching the Beatles Get Back documentary, every day John Lennon kind of wanders in a little bit late and kind of does his own thing. And also I see George, I see Paul up there in the top left corner. I see Ringo down there. Rob, you're Ringo. And actually, no, Cale, you got the Ringo mustache. You're Ringo. And I'm John with my glasses showing up being really cool.
Where's Yoko?
Yoko's not here, but I got this little buddy going for me here.
We're just talking about how Football Outsiders has the Patriots so much higher than any other advanced metric, and how I'm totally uncomfortable with that and don't quite understand what the difference is.
I'm a skeptic of the Patriots, but it makes sense to me when I look at everything statistically up until now. They seem to be right where they are. And I think I heard you guys talking about the Chiefs. The Chiefs still are the favorite in the market. Whoa, Cade. Oh, he's back.
I'm having some internet problems. I apologize.
Welcome back, Cale. It's like I thought you quit like George Harrison there.
Yeah, he walked out. Exactly. I was just going to say.
But I think nationwide, a lot of people are going to see that Chiefs, rising up and having a winning streak and saying, "Oh, we're going to try and bet that." So the market says, "Well, let's not give these guys incredible odds on this. Let's suppress that market a little bit."
I have a graphic to show, which is the Patriots week-to-week chart, and the Patriots week-to-week chart shows you just how incredibly upward trending their season has been.
Yes.
And the last 3 weeks are just phenomenal. And you wouldn't think that their game against Tennessee would come out this high, but the fourth quarter, they got to the fourth quarter and then they destroyed Tennessee in the fourth quarter. Absolutely just destroyed them.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they've had these 3 really, really, really good games. They've had this incredibly steady upward trend throughout the entire season. So they come out on top. And then when we lower the strength of the early season games, they get even a little bit higher than that. And then there's just this big gap between the Patriots and Bills and the rest of the AFC. And so we end up with the Patriots. If the Patriots lose this week, it will change.
Right.
Then the Bills will probably become our favorite. But we just have them with really high odds. And it makes me uncomfortable. As I said before you came on, Mike, honestly, I would rather, if we're going to have an outlier, I would rather have it be any other team than the Patriots.
Of course.
But this is where we are. And so this actually hits me with another question that we got before the show over Instagram from Imus18, which was, at this point last year, what was the projected Super Bowl matchup and how does that compare to this year? And last year, we had our top team even higher than we had the Patriots this year. And we were wrong. Last year, the number one team right now was the Saints. We gave them 32.5% odds of winning the Super Bowl.
Wow.
They were number one in Dave at that point.
This was in the midst of Taysom time, wasn't it?
I think this is adjusted for the idea that Breeze would come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we had Pittsburgh second. Remember, this is when they were 11-0.
Undefeated. Yeah.
Ooh.
And Kansas City third.
Okay. Well, that's fine.
Green Bay, Seattle, and we had Tampa Bay at 4.3% because they were fourth in Dave, but they were only 7-5.
And they were entering their goofy part of the schedule where things got very easy for them.
Right.
At that point.
When I look back at last year's playoff odds, it emphasizes to me the idea that I need to redo the playoff odds equation to make offense more important than defense. Because what the Saints and Pittsburgh were driven by defense, and we knew their offenses had some problems.
Right.
And we had them overprojected. That being said, somebody asked me a couple weeks ago to go through history, I think after week 10, and see what team we had on top of the Super Bowl odds each year. So I went back. I have 12 years of Super Bowl odds saved.
Okay.
And roughly, the average top team after 10 or 11 weeks is at about 25%, which is about where the Patriots are now.
Okay.
And 3 out of those 12 teams won the Super Bowl. In other words, of the teams that we had at 25% odds, 25% of them won the Super Bowl.
That
seems to be kind of accurate, right?
The problem is when probability is accurate, people think that probability is inaccurate. Because you gave them a 25% chance of winning the Super Bowl, and they didn't.
God forbid.
Yeah, we gave them a 75% chance of not winning the Super Bowl, and they didn't. So we were right.
The problem is I would want the teams that we had number 1 and number 2 at this point in the season to at least win a playoff game, which did not happen with New Orleans and Pittsburgh last year. Right. And Pittsburgh in particular, really fell off after that 11-0 start.
I feel
And
like
I
there
know.
should have been an indicator for Pittsburgh. There should have been an indicator because everybody was looking at that like.
Well, I'll give PFF some credit. They're our rivals, but I will give them some credit. Their grading on Roethlisberger threw up this gigantic red flag that the Pittsburgh thing was not sustainable. Now, also, Pittsburgh had defensive injuries after starting 11-0. So their defense fell off, too. Oh, the Saints did win in the playoffs. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they won.
Hitchhiker's Pie is right. The Saints beat the Bears.
How could you forget the game on Nickelodeon?
Yes.
Oh, God. That's right. I totally forgot about Mitch Trubisky, MVP.
The slime game.
Yes, Useful was first says you could still say that Pittsburgh is still falling now. Yes, Pittsburgh started falling after the 11-0 start last year, and it's never ended. Like, we agree. There's no way Roethlisberger can come back next year, right?
No.
Oh, they'll talk themselves into it somehow. I mean, he shouldn't.
I mean, speaking of I've fallen and I can't get up, who personifies that more than Ben Roethlisberger, right? But even saying that, like, he isn't the worst player, and he's not the A1 issue on that team. Like, he's kept them in some games. He's still made some plays.
Their offensive line is terrible.
The line's terrible. Their defensive we talked about this in the almanac before the season. Like, their front 11 starters on defense were, capable, highly capable, but their depth was not good, and any injuries was going to expose some things. And they've had a ton of injuries, and they're just not the same defense. And even when Watt plays right now, and he has COVID now too, but even when he plays, he's not, the same Watt that you expect out there destroying games and planets. So they have a lot of issues, and the quarterback is obviously the most visible, always gets the blame, et cetera. But they just have nothing. They have no wide receivers really outside of Deontay Johnson. I mean,
I disagree with that. I think they're good at wide receiver. Chase Claypool is good, and James Washington, for a fourth wide receiver, you can do a lot worse as your fourth wide receiver than James Washington.
But talent-wise, yes, but where is he? I mean, he's not playing a lot, and he's not getting the job done. There's got to be some reason for it. The coaches don't trust him, clearly. And Schuster's hurt. Obviously, that is something. Smith-Schuster is hurt. That has something to do with it too. Their line is young and hasn't cohered in any capacity, and they just don't give Roethlisberger any kind of chance. Believe me, I'm the last guy who's going to sit there and defend Ben Roethlisberger for the pain and anguish that guy has caused me these many years. Nevertheless, watching their games, like I still think they have other problems bigger than him, and I think the Steelers coaching staff would agree on that. They have a lot of issues.
I mean, that being said, what good is a good wide receiver core if your quarterback can't throw 10 yards? Like, Ben Roethlisberger's arm has looked bad at points this year. Like, it's with all the skill position players they've surrounded him with, like, you really can't do much with him just because of how much he's deteriorated over the last couple of years.
Yeah, this is kind of the optimization where they've tried everything with all the screen stuff and all the short stuff and all the just launch the 50-50 ball up the sideline and maybe you'll get a penalty because they're going to grab Claypool or they're going to grab Juju when he was healthy. They've optimized everything you do. Every shovel pass to the tight end ever known the man has been throwing the fire move. And this is where it gets you. It gets you a tie against the Lions. It gets you beaten down when the team is on. And sometimes you can catch somebody napping and get enough offense out of that.
The tie with the Lions was without Roethlisberger. So as useful was first pointed out, that actually tells you what their future is like without Roethlisberger.
That's right.
And there's, if you look at it, I've been surfing through some mock drafts just because that's usually what Bengal fans do around this time of year. Yeah, not the muscle memory takes me right to the collegiate prospects. And I think people know this, but it's not like we're a raft of quarterbacks coming out who are going to make a big difference in 22 and maybe even 23. So unless they find a way to somehow, pull off a Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers coup, they got issues going forward, no doubt.
Bill Houston says the Patriots remind him of an old Marty Schottenheimer team, great D that creates turnovers, but an average quarterback. They get tossed in the second round when they face the Bills or Chiefs. Well, I mean, the one thing I'll say about that is the Bills are kind of the same thing this year. I mean, Josh Allen has been a little bit better than Mac Jones, especially when you include in rushing value. Josh Allen has been clearly better than Mac Jones once you add in the rushing value. But, the Bills are living off their defense this year too. The Chiefs, on the other hand, the Chiefs are, built to all of a sudden go hog wild in the playoffs and beat a team like that.
Right. I've got all kinds of stats, and I'll use them tomorrow about field position and things like that. And the Patriots really look like a Marty Schottenheimer team when you count things like starting field position and things like that. So,
Hitchhiker Spy says, we thought that 2021 was a strong quarterback draft, and so far only Mac has hit. So projecting college quarterbacks is too hard to be confident in any prospects helping or hurting.
right.
It's true. I mean, the fact is, we know what we know, but we don't know as much as we think we do. And it's possible that these quarterbacks that we're writing off could be good. That's why I think that while people are saying that like Detroit should use their number one pick on a pass rusher, I don't think it's crazy for them to use it on a quarterback, even if none of the quarterbacks are considered that good. Just because if you hit on quarterback, it means so much more than hitting on a pass rusher.
Yeah,
Right.
Trade down.
The thing is,
We do have a general idea of how good prospects are, and this just doesn't look like a
None of them are Lawrence or Fields. Let's put it that way. But, they haven't shown much this season so far, perhaps. But those guys, as prospects, are in a totally different league than the guys coming out this year.
Yeah, your historic quarterback classes sometimes disappear in a couple of years. They weren't that good. But the terrible quarterback classes, the Geno Smith.
Right. The EJ Manuel year did not suddenly surprise us.
Right. So you can usually tell bad. You can't always tell great.
Yeah, but I mean, credit to the other 4 guys that are in this class. Like, it does feel as though, like, Mac Jones could not have been put in a better situation to succeed getting put in New England. And I still, like, there's absolutely still time for a Lawrence, a Fields to shake out here, especially if Chicago can get away from Matt Nagy. My opinion, like, there's still a lot of time on the clock for these guys. But going back to the Schottenheimer comment, Mac Jones hasn't quite been an average quarterback this year either. Like, he's 13th in DYAR. If we're going to Ben Baldwin's EPA CPOE metric, he's 10th, and I think he's also he's 8th in CPOE or 6th in CPOE. So he's played, for where he's been at, he's played pretty well above his pay grade. For being the 5th quarterback off the board in a loaded class. But I think, again, like I said, that also comes down pretty heavily to just situation where he's landed, like being surrounded by a top offensive line, having decent skill position players to work with, like pretty good situation.
Right. Those old Schottenheimer quarterbacks were like late career Montana and Dave Craig and all too. So it wasn't like we're talking about like a low level quarterback play. We're talking about more like ball control, yak quarterback play. And I think that really applies here.
Steve DeBerg, baby.
Yes.
And the naked.
What do you guys think about Trevor Lawrence? Because I feel like it's time we can start talking about how bad he's been, but I still feel like you can ask the question, but the answer is still he's in a bad situation. But I feel like we can ask the question.
I got worried. Of course, I was watching the Falcons game. I've explained to you guys why I wind up watching Falcons games, but when he throws on the move, his arm is like back here in some weird place. There's this weird unnatural thing of his motion of his feet are not set. And that worries me because he didn't look like that at Clemson at all. That like he's just the coaches are just like, go win games first, try things. And the bad habits are starting to come in. Like the bad mechanics are coming in. The bad decisions that come from never having anybody open. That's a concern that I have that I didn't have a couple weeks ago because I wasn't really watching him and like his delivery on these passes.
Bill Houston says, why does Tanier watch Falcons games?
I am a masochist. There is a person in our local tavern who has a personal connection to the Falcons, who always has one television on, usually right over my shoulder here. And that Falcons game is on no matter what. And that person is cheering ardently for the Falcons. So I have become sort of a Falcons expert.
I live in Atlanta. I never watch them. So, that's all you need to know.
Good call. Good decision.
Hitchhiker's Pie, by the way, says, does FO Plus offer game-by-game DYAR splits specifically for postseason? No, but it's something we're working on, first for regular season, then for postseason. Stay tuned.
Right.
Ooh,
and don't forget, FO Plus is only 99 cents a week right now with an annual subscription to get all of our DVOA splits, and when they finally come out, DYAR splits and picks against the spread and fantasy football tools and all that stuff. 99 cents a week for an annual subscription. FootballOutsiders.com/subscribe.
Yes.
The hard sell.
Here's another question we got before the show, which is now that we have Mike on, we want to talk about. Hobo Power asked, what is the argument for Gale Sayers being in the Hall of Fame, but not Sterling Sharpe? Sharpe was more dominant at wide receiver in the 90s than Sayers was at running back in the 60s, and Sharpe played in 44 more games. Why doesn't he get any consideration?
Well, first of all, there's no argument. The Hall of Fame committee doesn't meet and say, well, we have to get like continuity between Gale Sayers and Sterling Sharpe. You know, this is not something that was ever discussed. Gale Sayers was put in, I forget what year, 1971 or 72, and Sharpe's candidacy came in the 90s. So at no point did anyone look for internal consistency there.
No, there's probably not anybody who was on the committee in the 70s who's still on the committee.
Right.
Is Sterling Sharpe even able to be discussed now, or at this point are we past that? He would have to go in from a veterans committee.
I think he has to go in. I believe he was still getting semifinalists a year or two ago, but I think he's going into the seniors committee where he goes into that huge pool of old timers, at which point he will finally bubble to the top. What happened with Sharpe's candidacy was he came in, his career was short. He came in during the big logjam of Art Monk, Andre Reed, Chris Carter. And this was a big to-do because Chris Carter had to wait like 3 or 4 turns to get in the Hall of Fame, and Tim Brown was in that. And they all got to the finalist pool at the same time. They would all get argued about, and the vote would split, as often happens in the Hall of Fame. So Sterling Sharpe comes in, a younger player, a more recent player, without all those numbers, without rings, anything else like that, and he gets stuck behind all of these guys and just falls off the back of things. Now, the fact that he never bubbled back up, I do find that odd. And I'm not sure why that happened. His brother came through and got in the Hall of Fame and everything. He doesn't. But that's what happened with his candidacy. And he just got – I don't think it's great. I don't think it's fair. I think he's an outstanding candidate. But that's what happened. That's why he got there. Gale Sayers was a 60s legend.
Right. Todd Singer points out Brian's song had something to do with the fact that Gale Sayers got into the Hall of Fame with just 68 games.
He was beloved. And as somebody who tried to cover Sterling Sharpe on multiple occasions and tried to talk to him as a member of the media and who votes on the Hall of Fame, but members of the media, Sterling Sharpe, kind of a prick, to be blunt about it all. And, you wouldn't think that would enter into it. But when you have Gale Sayers, who's beloved, versus a guy, and Shannon Sharpe, who's beloved, and Sterling Sharpe, a guy who blew off the media his entire career, then turned right around and went on ESPN, and it's like, oh, yeah, I'm an analyst now. Yeah. People in the media do not like that. And if there's even a slight chance to, give a little bit of payback or maybe just kind of push him to the back of the pile, I think they took it in Sterling Sharpe's case. He's a borderline case, and, small things like that matter.
There are Sterling Sharpe stories like that. Now, of course, the disclaimer I always point out is Warren Sapp would never get in the Hall of Fame ever if we could really hold that much of a grudge. But it is like that. Here's this list of people, and it's Tim Brown and Art Monk and Andre Reed and Chris Carter and Sterling Sharpe goes on there, and you're like, no one will know if I sandbag him a little bit if I just pick one of the other guys. I have a completely viable alternative here.
That's the thing, exactly. He's not a slam dunk like Warren Sapp necessarily, or somebody. There's plenty of pricks Lawrence Taylor is not exactly Mother Teresa, but guys who are on the edge when it's just going to be this or that little scooch, or like you say, just a non-push in their favor is going to make the difference. It enters into it.
Any discussion of the Hall of Fame has to start by just delineating the differences between the NFL Hall of Fame and baseball, because people tend to have the Baseball Hall of Fame on the brain. Yeah. And remember the 2 main differences. The first is it's of a committee of about 32 people, not 500.
500 or 600, I think.
And 2, it's not that everybody over a certain percentage gets in. It's 5 a year.
Yep.
Like if you had unanimously, everybody on the Hall of Fame committee believed that 7 guys should get in, you would still only have 5 guys.
No, that's right. And that's what happens every single bout. When you go in there and you say, how did you snub Zach Thomas? It's like, we didn't snub Zach Thomas. We had to get Alan Faneca in this year. Or we decided to get Calvin Johnson in this year.
That's why I feel like Leroy Butler. Like Leroy Butler is, we all agree, he's going in at some point. Yes. It's just a question of, there just hasn't been a year where he made that 5. Like, there's going to be a year where he makes that 5 and someone younger is going to get snubbed. Maybe Richard Seymour or something.
Right. And that continues to happen year after year. And when there's a logjam of 5 or 6 guys at a position, which there often is, forget about it, because it's then chaos, split votes. And if there's two guys from the same team and they're local reporter can only bang the drum so much, they're going to pick guy A or guy B, and the other person's going to be on the wayside. This happened with Holt and Bruce for a while for the Rams, where it's like, you desperately are trying to if you're Howard, you're desperately trying to vote for both of them, and you sort of have to prioritize one at some point.
Howard Balzer, you're mentioning, who's I believe the St. Louis representative. I believe he's still the representative for the Rams rather than a Los Angeles.
So.
Yeah, that is funny.
Hitchhiker's Pie asks, is voting reform ever likely for the Hall? The number of players have gone up, but it's still the same sized entry every year because we've gone from 26 teams to 28 to 30 to 32.
Rumor has it they're going to get more and more players involved. And to Rob's point, if you think little grudges are bad among the media, wait until there's a lot of players involved.
Good point.
It's going to be ridiculous. Okay, if you think that'll get the politics out of it, have you ever heard an old player talk?
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that part of it is going to change, whether that's reform or not. I personally got a reform that's being weaved up into like higher. I have no idea where it is, but some of the people I talked to have suggested on my behalf, if you are a 5-time finalist, that you get a special separate vote, and that your vote is separate from the 5. And if they give you a majority, then you go in. So if you are Lori Butler and you're a 5-time finalist, or Baselli, the 5-time finalist, they say, okay, guys, we're not going to have another argument over Butler.
They don't even need to make a majority. They could make it 75%, and you would still have guys get in that way.
You're in, and now let's vote for our 5. And over 2 or 3 years, there'd be like 8 guys get in. And then after that, it'd probably be back to 5 because you'd probably lower the logjam.
Todd Singer says Zach Thomas pitched to the score. I think that's a comment regarding. I know Mike has a saying, which is every city has its linebacker.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's a Jack Morris argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think Thomas of all those linebackers, where every city has their linebacker, Thomas may be the best of them right now. Until we get to Bobby Wagner or Patrick Willis.
Yeah, and Wagner will get in, and Willis is now a semifinalist, so he's getting in there. I think Zach Thomas is getting in. I don't know I don't know baseball, so I don't know what pitch to the score.
The idea is, I think, is he played better against bad teams than against good teams. He played better.
The stats aren't as great because it wasn't about just being dominant. He would, pitch 120 pitches when his team was up 6-2 and win 6-5, but his team still won, that kind of stuff,
Okay.
It's not about, it's a way of excusing poor.
It is a Jack Morris reference. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some old coaches, and I've heard this through the grapevine because I talked to a lot of the voters, who are very pro Zach Thomas, and there are old coaches who are very anti Zach Thomas. I think talking to what Todd Singer is saying there, that he sort of get a lot of tackles in a lot of situations where it was schemed up for him, et cetera. Yeah. I think there's enough old coaches and old players of note who bang the table for him that he should get in eventually.
That's true of most of the middle linebacker, right? Most of every town has their linebacker candidates, right? Sam Mills played a role where the guys in front of him basically soaked up blocks so he could get tackles,
Right. Or it's just like the entire argument is he was the heart and soul of our team. And it's like, well, we appreciate that. There were 32 hearts and souls, or 28 back in the day. And they all had a couple of Pro Bowl appearances, and not all of them, certainly not all of them. Most of them cannot be Hall of Famers. London Fletcher comes into that. I think Fletcher's another guy who tons and tons of tackles and things like that. And then, you have to stack it all up and see if it reaches the Hall of Fame. I don't think it would.
Right. Fletcher, Mills, Teddy Bruschi, I think would go in that argument.
Right. Right. He's
Jesse
like the ring
Tuggle.
for the argument.
Who?
Jesse Tuggle, the Atlanta guy. They always compared him to Sam Mills. Like, he's our Sam Mills.
Yeah, and he had a heck of a couple of really
ball player. Loved them. Yeah, it's all these guys who tend to be, kind of short of stature, not great prospects coming in, overachievers.
Yeah,
find their way into the league and then play very well, much higher than you would think, looking at them physically or just how they profiled coming into the league. And those guys have, there's a lot of emotional weight and attachment attached to those guys. No question about it. It doesn't necessarily mean they're all
Jonah says Urlacher is the most overrated of those guys.
Yeah, his star has descended lately. There were a couple of years ago.
Strikes me as one of those guys who's so overrated he's become underrated.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see
the hair situation with him doesn't help. There's no question.
He's on the center of some great defenses. And yes, they also had Lance Briggs and they also had Peanut Tillman, but he was the main player on some great defense.
On some teams that made the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman.
Yeah,
right.
At quarterback. Although there's going to be Devin Hester arguments coming up because he's now a semifinalist. And I can't see, I want to believe, but I can't believe that he's a Hall of Famer because as dominant as he was as a return man, he was a return man. We're talking about, 7 plays a game, etc. But that conversation is going to be had if he makes the finalist group.
Yeah, Hester is an interesting conversation because it honestly has nothing to do with Hester himself. It's really about whether you think a return man can go in the Hall of Fame. But if Hester goes in, then Cordarrelle Patterson has to go in.
I don't know about has to. Has Cordarrelle, as good as Cordarrelle's been, have they started just like kicking off to the up man to get away from it? I know they did it.
There was a while where they did. Since they changed the rules, people haven't really done that.
Right. And that's it. But I go back to some of the great return men in history, including Gale Sayers.
Yeah.
And it's like, what else did you do? That's the potatoes of your Hall of Fame debate. Where's the steak, So
right. I mean, at least it's a different argument than the Steve Tasker argument. Because you feel like because they score touchdowns, at least return men have a little bit more impact on things.
Yes. The Tasker argument is fan favoritism.
Every town has their Steve Tasker.
If you enjoy the Tasker argument now, you'll love it in 15 years when we're having it about Matthew Slater.
Oh God, I would take Slater over Tasker.
But instead of the Buffalo media, it will be the New England media.
I can't wait because there's no homerism in the Boston media.
They're all a bunch of peaches, personality-wise, too.
Love you guys.
One other question we got before the show, by the way, just to bring this up, because I tweeted about it actually yesterday. The Simpsons paradox with the Chargers in San Francisco. For people who don't know what Simpsons paradox is, Simpsons paradox is when you have one group is better than another group in 2 different things, but when you combine them, the second group is better than the first group in the combination because of what the ratio is.
Right.
Between the samples. So San Francisco is better than the Chargers, both passing and rushing. But the Chargers have better offensive DVOA because they pass much more than the 49ers do.
I love it.
That's Simpson's paradox.
Is that named for O.J. Simpson?
I believe
his paradox was different. That's right. Not going to get it.
I did point that out over Twitter yesterday. So, yes, I have noticed it. And it is always interesting when that happens. Because they pass more often, the Chargers end up as a better offense than the 49ers, even though the 49ers are better on both runs and passes.
Well, the 49ers are better at getting 18-play, 75-yard drives that last 9 minutes and 44 seconds. So,
they're the anti-Seahawks.
That game is going to be just a 49er show. They're playing this week.
Yeah.
Time of possession is going to be 54 minutes for the 49ers.
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
But then the Seahawks are still going to complete 3 50-yard passes and lose by only 3.
Let's hope it's that competitive.
I don't hate the Seahawks. I hate the 2021 Seahawks. I really hate them.
Yeah. Well, they're, I wrote about them this week. They may have actually broken DVOA.
Is it because they have so few plays that when they have successful ones, they
Yeah, because what happens is that the denominator is small because the number of plays is small.
Right.
So since their successful plays are so successful, they end up coming out as kind of average.
Oh my God.
Because there's just not enough plays. It's just normally this happens in like a game, right? You have teams that for a game have this combination of 3 and outs with a couple of deep plays.
Right.
You rarely have a team that does that for an entire year. Usually being more efficient means eventually you'll have more plays and you won't go 3 and out so much. And they're just really crazy.
They get more like themselves.
But what's confusing is that I went and found that the 2016 Miami Dolphins had the same thing going on, except they went 10-6
with Adam Gase at head coach.
I believe that was Tannehill with Adam Gase. Yes, and so that just confuses me even more.
The year
they had like a lot of 3 and outs and only 5 plays per drive. but their DVOA was average because they had deep shots. And instead of going 3-8, they went 10-6. So I threw up once I discovered that, I was going to write about how unique the Seahawks were until I found another team just like them that was only 5 years old. And then I threw up my hands. I don't freaking understand the stupid Seahawks. I just know they're not fun to watch.
Play the Jets twice and win. They are not. They're brutal to watch unless you like watching the other team's offense. Which Washington,
like it is like deep shots are fun, but like I'd much rather watch two teams just moving the ball down the field than have to watch the 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out over and over and over. Because also turnovers are fun, and Seattle doesn't have any of those. Right. Seattle is number 1 in the league in fewest turnovers per drive. They go 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, but they never turn the ball over.
They punt a lot.
Good for Michael Dixon.
A lot.
Yeah, Dixon leads the league in punts and punt yards, but not punt average.
Not average.
And I was doing a lot of field position research. Again, we'll probably talk about tomorrow because that game's probably on the list. And they're like the only bad team that has a major field position advantage.
That game is not on the list. Screw that game. They're not coming tomorrow.
Well, do we think this is it for Pete Carroll? I mean, to take a more macro question, I mean, where do we see him at the end of this year? I know he's got a ton of power there. It's sort of up to him, but, you know.
I don't know how their ownership thinks. But I think this is this would be a good time to start over. And it doesn't mean that Pete Carroll is a bad coach or that John Schneider is a bad GM. I just feel like this is a good time to start it. The same when the Eagles said goodbye to Andy Reid. Like this is a good time to refresh the team.
I question whether
someone new can get more out of Russ.
I do question, like, I don't think you always choose quarterback over head coach, but just considering where their draft positioning is and like their ability to actually recoup and rebuild this team through the draft and through prospects, I wonder if the nuclear option of trading Russ is a viable option just because they are so limited in the picks that they have.
But even if I traded Russ, I would still feel like it was time to hit the reset button on the front office.
I agree. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, they've got to recoup anything at this point.
I agree. I mean, it's worth answering the phone because quarterback needy teams are going to be calling because there's nobody in the draft.
Yeah. Yes. And especially if it's a city where Ciara wants to live, then you got to leg up.
All right. One last question before we go for today. Bill Houston. Rob, do you consider the debut of the Icky Shuffle to be the apex of the Bengals franchise?
Well, it's either that or, the first game that I remember watching when they beat the Steelers and then in a dramatic victory in the old Riverfront Stadium and then with the AFC Central in front of them, went to Houston the following week and fell flat on their butt and lost it both. But, the Icky Shuffle is way, way up there. I mean, it still resonates, and we're talking, 30-plus years from now. I mean, I never would have thought that at the time.
Didn't you do an ad a couple years ago?
Yeah,
you know what the Icky Shuffle is?
Say again?
Me? Yes. Yeah. No, I know what the Icky Shuffle is.
Okay.
The whole same conversation went over my head, but I know what the Icky Shuffle is.
If we had more room, I would do the Icky Shuffle right now. It's almost because he got hurt then the following year and never really did anything again, and it's had such a afterlife almost because of that. And he was such a comet streaking across the sky. Is that the apex? Given their lack of anything in future Super Bowls that they played or anything that, any better dance moves, I guess Chad Ochocinco Johnson would quibble with that. And this past week's Temptations line that they ran in the end zone was pretty good too.
I was going to say he got hurt and never did anything again. That's like the title of the history of the Cincinnati Bengals franchise.
Unfortunately, that's definitely the subhead of the Bengals 50-year history. It's really just been crushing. That's why I knock wood every time I talk about this year's edition that they remain healthy and it's something we can all hope for, but the addition of the 17th game really doesn't do wonders for that particular
on any other team. Yeah. All right, folks. Thank you to Rob Weintraub, Cale Clinton, Mike Tanier for joining me today. Thank you to everybody watching. I appreciate all of you, everybody asking questions. We love your questions. Thanks for watching on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, listening after the fact on the Football Outsiders Podcast Network. Please Subscribe to the show. Tell your friends. Post about us on social media how much you love the show. We're here every weekday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow, JP Acosta will join me and Mike Tanier to preview Week 13. And then Parker Fleming will come in late in the show and preview the college conference championship games. Can anybody stop the Georgia Bulldogs? Your hometown boys, Rob.
No, it doesn't seem likely this year. No, they're a powerhouse.
All right, guys. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for watching the show. Thanks for listening to the show. We will see you again tomorrow. Take care.